If I could have everybody's attention, please. We'll begin momentarily. So my name is Dr. Kevin Thomas. I'm a psychologist in Monsoor Counseling Center, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Eating Disorder Task Force. We're a collaborative campus-wide committee, and we're made up of various different entities, but primarily our membership is about Monsoor Counseling Center, Student Health Services, and Health Education Outreach, as well as CMS Athletics, as well as a lot of the deans and different support entities that we have on campus. And so we're really here to be able to support the students and be them and help them whatever ways we can. And one of the ways to do that is to bring speakers like Mr. Brian Cuban to be able to be here today. So let me give you a little bit of background about him before we begin. So Brian Cuban is an author of the best-selling book, Shattered Image, My Triumph Over Body Dysmorphic Disorder. It chronicles his firsthand experience living with and recovering from eating disorders, drug addiction, and body dysmorphic disorder. Mr. Cuban speaks regularly about his recovery, childhood bullying, fat shaming, breaking the male eating disorder stigma. Mr. Cuban has spoken at many locations, including University of North Carolina Center for Excellence of Eating Disorders. He has keynoted events such as the Entertainment Industries Council 3rd Annual Media and Mental Health Awards. Mr. Cuban has appeared on national talk shows such as The Katie Couric Show, and to discuss issues all above. He has written extensively on the subjects. He has columns that have appeared on CNN, Fox News, Huffington Post, and online and print newspapers around the world. Mr. Cuban is based in Dallas, Texas, and also the segment host for Brian Cuban's Legal Briefs, an eye-opener TV and founder of his blog, The Cuban Revolution. Additionally, Mr. Cuban is a lawyer and activist specializing in First Amendment issues and hate speech, and has lectured on the topic at major media outlets and conferences around the world. If you can all join me in please giving a round of applause for Mr. Brian Cuban.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, last time I spoke, it took me a while to realize that I wasn't speaking into the mic because I have a lavalier. Trying to speak into this phantom mic, so I won't do that this time. I'm so grateful to be here at Claremont College, the consortium. I was given a wonderful tour and glad we have some nice weather today, and hopefully I can bring some of this weather back to Dallas where the weather has been miserable. We get a ½ inch of snow in Dallas and the whole town shuts down. So we're just not used to such things. And I'm grateful to be here for a lot of reasons. I'm grateful because I love to share my story with college students and let them know that no matter where they may be in recovery or what their thought process is that there is hope for recovery. You can recover, and it's a process, and you can be as old as me and go into recovery, and that's okay. But don't wait that long. And I'm also grateful because there was a substantial chance that I would not be standing up here today. And I'm going to explain what that means with a question. How many people have been to Las Vegas here? So you know gambling. If you were to walk into a Las Vegas sports book, take the hot tub time machine back to about 2005, when some of you were probably like 12 years old or whatever, and place a bet on, say, whether the Los Angeles Dodgers were going to win a championship or whether Brian Cuban would be alive standing up here today, you'd get better odds on the Los Angeles Dodgers. And what would have gone into those odds were that I was anorexic as a freshman at Penn State at 18 years old. I became bulimic at 19 years old, and I stayed bulimic till I was 45 years old, going into recovery. I was an alcoholic by 21. I was a drug addict by 27. By the time I was 44, I had come close to suicide and been to a psychiatric facility not once but twice. Let's not forget 3 failed marriages. One more, I get a free set of steak knives. And finally, recovery. Finally, the ability to share my story and hopefully empower others into recovery. So how does that happen? How does a young little boy with no dysfunction, no problems, 9, 10 years old, happy, playing kickball, back in the baby boomer era, 2 brothers, a younger brother named Jeff and an older brother Mark, you may know as the Shark Tank guy. The middle child of those 3, very quiet, very shy, classic middle child syndrome. I gauged everything about my self-worth by what was said to me. Very needing of acceptance. And unfortunately, I had a very difficult relationship with my mother. And I'm going to talk about that relationship, and I don't want anyone here to think that I'm blaming my mother for what happened to me, because I am not, because we know that parents do not cause eating disorders. Okay. We know that eating disorders are a mix of genetics and environment, and we haven't figured out yet the mix of how those things interact. Hopefully one day we will. Some of you may have heard the saying that genetics loads the gun, environment pulls the trigger. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about my environment. There was a lot of fat shaming growing up in my household. My mom would say to me if I was home eating Chef Boyardee ravioli out of the can as a 13-year-old, do they still have Chef Boyardee? I used to love that. And she'd come home and say, Brian, if you keep eating that, you're going to be a fat pig. And these were the things my mom had said to her by her mom. And these were the things her mom had said to her by her mom. Fat talk in families is often generational in nature. So as you might imagine, as a young boy just wanting of acceptance, I kind of internalized that and kind of started feeling bad about myself. And if I came home with bad grades, she'd say, Brian, you're a dumb bunny. And so you kind of started to felt like a kind of heavy, dumb bunny kid as I started to eat more to feel better about myself, as I grew clinically depressed as a 13 and 14-year-old, and I started to gain weight. And people asked me, well, why didn't you tell your brothers about this? Why didn't you tell your fathers about what was going on? Well, brothers don't talk about that stuff. We don't have many conversations about that now. Now, football, what's going on with those Dodgers? How the Rams doing? Yeah, guys don't talk about that stuff, especially back in the baby boomer era when we had very defined gender roles. What about my dad? Well, when you're a 13-year-old little boy and you're sleeping at night in your bedroom and your parents are in that room next to you, that is your unconditional sense of safety, your unconditional sense of love and trust that nothing's going to get you that night, that you will be fed, that you will be clothed, that the monsters from the scary movie you watched that evening will not come in your room and get you because your parents are right next to you. In the mind of a 13-year-old boy, I wasn't going to jeopardize that. I wasn't going to tell my father, who I love very much and who I wanted approval from, that I had this difficult relationship with the mother he was married to. Because in the mind of a 13-year-old boy, what was going to happen? He's going to kick me out of the house. He's going to give me that little pole, you see in the cartoons with the little bag hanging down. And I'm going to have to go hit the road. Who's going to take care of me? Who's going to feed me? Who's going to love me? So I kept quiet. And I took it. And I grew depressed. And I ate even more. Because food made me feel okay for a second. But when those seconds were over, then I felt ashamed of my body. And as I got bigger, the bullying started in school. The weight bullying, the taunts, the weight teasing. Brian, you need a bra. Go get a bra with those man boobs. Yeah, I know. It's so funny. I need to get one. I'm going to Sears. You develop a very self-deprecating sense of humor as a wall, as protection, laughing it off. It's a problem I have to work on today, this self-deprecating sense of humor, making fun of myself, because I learned it as a child to protect myself from the taunts from my mother, to protect myself from the taunts from the bullies at school. Yeah, I know, my butt looks like 15 cats back there. I know. It's okay, I'm laughing too. But I wasn't laughing. I was crying inside because these kids making fun of me were the kids I wanted acceptance from so badly. The popular kids, in my mind, the popular kids. The kids that were holding a girl's hand. The kids that were going to the prom. The kids that were going to the parties. I wanted to be a part of that. So I would hang around sort of on the fringes of these kids, hoping that one day they would accept me. One day everything would be okay and I would be loved. Well, it all culminated in what I call in the day of the gold pants. My brother Mark used to teach disco way back when. Did everyone here know what disco is? And he had back before even Saturday Night Fever and John Travolta made it popular. He had these shiny gold disco pants, and he used to wear them, and they were bell bottoms. And he gave them to me. My brother gave me these shiny gold disco pants, and I love my brother, and I wore them to school every day. Like, never washed them. Boy, did they smell. But they were mine, and they were given to me by my brother. But Mark wasn't a big guy. So these pants were tight on me. I mean, I had to spray the bottle, zip them up, and my butt did look like 15 cats back there walking around. But I didn't care. I wore them. And I'm walking home with this group of kids this one afternoon, kids who made fun of me, kids that I just sort of hung around on the outside because one day they'll accept me. But they just kept taunting, and I took it. One of them goes, "Boy, Brian, those pants look tight on you." "Yeah, I know." Another one goes, "I think we need to take those pants off him because he looks so bad in them. He looks so funny in them, that fat kid." And another one goes, "Let's do it." They proceeded to assault me. These kids that I knew in school, these kids who I wanted to be my friends, assaulted me, and they ripped those pants right off me. Everyone know what being pantsed is? I was pants like nobody's ever been pants. They tore these gold pants off me down to my tighty whities, my Fruit of the Looms, and they ripped them up and threw them in the street. And went on walking, laughing, not realizing what they had done, the bullying behavior. I mean, if this was in the mid-'70s where there was no YouTube, no digital cameras. If this had happened today, it had probably been on YouTube. But back then, going viral meant 15 people in the lunchroom knew about it. And they didn't know about it, and I was ashamed. I went home in my tighty whities. I walked out and I covered up my private parts. No one stopped in the mile walk to my home. People gawked. I got home. I was ashamed. I was ashamed for two reasons. I was ashamed that I didn't know how to stand up to bullies. And I was ashamed that I had validated everything my mother and these bullies were sent to me. A fat pig and a dumb bunny who just couldn't stand up for himself. And it was kind of right there that I really started to see myself in a different way when I would look in the mirror. That event was so traumatic to me that I can go to that spot in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, all these years later and show you exactly where it happened. That is how that event affected me in my life. So I just threw the pants away, didn't tell anyone. No one asked. Mark didn't ask. And I went on with my business as a self-loathing person now. A self-loathing teenager who looked in the mirror and saw this fat pig and this dumb bunny. And I went on to Penn State University. Freshman at Penn State. I was so happy to go to Penn State. Growing up in Pittsburgh, that's where everyone went. I would get out of Pittsburgh. I would get away from my mom. I'd get away from the bullies. Everything would be different. My life was going to change. I would be accepted. I would finally get to hold a girl's hand. I would finally get to go on a date. I was looking forward to the beer parties. Everyone was going to be my friend. I would finally be loved in a way that I evaluated love in terms of body acceptance. The first day at Penn State, freshman orientation. Beautiful day, my father's unloading the car. I'm in my dorm. I'm looking out. And I make eye contact with this brown-haired girl. She looks back at me and smiles. I start sweating. I'd never been on a date or kissed a girl or held a girl's hand. I start sweating. And within a 15-second period, I envisioned our first date, our marriage, our kids, and the rest of our lives together. And I'm like, okay, I'm accepted. Look at this girl smiling at me. Well, it wasn't a smile. It was a smirk. She turns to the two girls she was talking to, looks back at me, puts her hands like this, and goes, "Ugly, ugly." Wow. And I'm not the first person stuff like this has happened to. Kids can be cruel. But they affected me in a way that was consistent with my kind of shy psychological makeup needing of acceptance and what had already been inflicted on me moving up to that point. And I was like, wow. I felt like I'd just been pantsed again. And it was right there as a freshman at Penn State University, 18 years old, that a switch flipped. I realized that my life seemed to be totally out of control, and I wanted control so badly. I wanted to be accepted so badly. What could I do? I turned back to food because food made me feel good. But I didn't want to feel good in the way that in my mind had caused the taunting at home, caused the bullies to assault me. I went in another direction. I began to restrict. As an 18-year-old at Penn State University, I had discovered anorexic behavior, and I restricted. And as I began to lose all the weight, there were affirmations. Brian, you're looking great. Keep going. I'm accepted. I'm accepted. Look, these people are accepting me. Keep going. I would restrict even more. But there was a problem. I was in the early stages of something that wasn't even talked about or really researched back then, body dysmorphic disorder. And here's what body dysmorphic disorder is. It is when someone takes a basically small or even non-existent defect in their body and exaggerates it to the point where it affects their ability to function, quote unquote, normally in life. For me, it was my stomach. No matter how thin I got, I saw this massive stomach in the mirror or in a car window reflection, in a mall window reflection, this horrifying monster that in my mind, the kids at school and my mother had told me I was. For other people, it may be plastic surgery. By the way, I abuse that too. They may have a small blemish that they exaggerate. I abused plastic surgery till I went broke. Other people get eating disorders. 30% of those with body dysmorphic disorder develop eating disorders. People abuse drugs, people abuse alcohol, people kill themselves. That's body dysmorphic disorder that affects men and women almost equally. There is kind of a stereotype and a stigma around it that is the kind of a stereotype and a stigma around eating disorders that it is a woman's disorder. Body dysmorphic disorder is not a woman's disorder, just like eating disorders are not a woman's disorder. When in fact we know now that up to 30% of all those with eating disorders are in fact men, according to a recent Harvard study. And that is up from the traditionally quoted 10 to 15%. And it's probably even higher because men still tend to underreport their eating disorder, still tend to not seek treatment because of the shame and the stigma. Here's an example. When I'll speak to groups, I'll tell them, hey, I'm a recovering alcoholic. I got a buddy at 12-step. I'm a recovering drug addict. I got a buddy just went to rehab. I'm also a recovering steroid addict. Legalize them. I'm a recovering bulimic. Silence. All the guys in the room tend to take 3 steps backwards like a little dance. Guys, it's not contagious. But that's the shame around male eating disorders. That's the stigma around eating disorders. And when I first became anorexic, you can't even say there was a stigma, because for there to be a stigma, there has to be a public conversation. And in 1979, when I began restricting, there was no public conversation. Who knows who Karen Carpenter is? Okay, for those who don't, Karen Carpenter was a beautiful singer who passed away in 1983 from complications related to anorexia. And she kind of brought anorexia into the pre-digital national spotlight before the internet, before Al Gore invented the internet, right? So this was before even that. When I transitioned to bulimia in 1980, bulimia had only been a word, a clinical diagnosis, for 4 years, since 1976. So I had no idea what anorexia was. I didn't know the word existed. I had no idea what bulimia was. I just knew that it felt shameful. When I transitioned to bulimia as a sophomore at Penn State, it just felt shameful. But for that 3 seconds, or that 4 seconds of the act, I felt like I would be accepted the next day. I felt like everything would be okay. But when that is over, what happens? The shame comes in to fill the void. So I had to have that few-second feeling of acceptance again and again and again. The life of Brian Cuban as a male bulimic in 1980. Who was there to tell? Nobody. There was no treatment. How can I tell people about something I didn't understand? That it was more just like breathing. I don't worry about how I breathe, right? It was something that just I became trained to do just for that 3 seconds of feeling of needing acceptance. So it was really just about camouflaging a shameful behavior and functioning. And that's what I did. As a sophomore at Penn State University, I camouflaged my behavior and I just functioned the best I could. And then I turned 21. And I discovered alcohol. And before you knew it, I was an alcoholic as a sophomore, then junior at Penn State University. Because the act of bulimia didn't make me feel accepted when it was over. Well, maybe getting drunk will. Maybe if I'm drunk all the time, I'll feel accepted. Maybe if I'm drunk all the time, I won't feel the self-loathing and the pain. And I won't feel like everyone else sees what my mother and these bullies had told me that I was. There's a saying that I hear at colleges all the time when I speak. Well, you're not an alcoholic till you graduate. Let me tell you, that is not true. You can be a college student. You can be an alcoholic. And it's kind of funny. I walked into this hamburger joint one day at Penn State. And a lot of times, 12-step organizations, even back then, they put out these racks of pamphlets that says, "Are you an alcoholic?" And I remember picking up that pamphlet, just looking through it, and if you answer 2 of these questions, 2 of these 10 questions, you're an alcoholic. I answered like 8 of them, yes. I'm just a college student. I think I was drunk at the time, too. So, now I'm a bulimic, alcoholic at Penn State University. I wasn't through yet. I discovered that I could go out and exercise, and I could be alone exercising, not have to worry about being judged, not have to worry about being around other people who were going to see me as what I saw in the mirror, that fat kid. I transitioned into exercise bulimia. And what exercise bulimia is when your mind kind of converts food to numbers and you try to exercise that off as a means to offset. And before I knew it, I was running 10 miles a day, 20 miles a day, skipping class to run, skipping meals to run, in addition to being a traditional bulimic. So I was so dehydrated some days as a junior at Penn State University from the running, from the traditional bulimia, that I couldn't get out of bed. I was very lucky not to have a stroke, not to have a heart attack from the fluid imbalance that caused. And so I did survive as a barely functioning student at Penn State. I was very lucky because I did have the ability to study the night before an exam and just go in and take it and give all that information back and do okay. So I graduated. What am I going to do with my life? Well, instinctively, I decided I was going to repeat the cycle of college because I didn't want to go into the real world. I didn't want people to saw what I saw in myself. So in my warped way of thinking as a bulimic and an alcoholic at Penn State University, I decided that law school was the best bet for me because I could go to law school for 3 years and hide. Okay, just stay a student, 3 years and hide and not have to interact with anyone, where I could be with what I viewed as survival, my bulimia and my alcoholism. If you're thinking of going to law school, don't do it for that reason. Okay? That's my advice today. Don't do it for that reason. Go for good reasons. And there are many great reasons to go to law school. So I went to University of Pittsburgh School of Law. And I went as an alcoholic not in treatment, as a bulimic not in treatment, as an exercise bulimic not in treatment. Now we're in 1986. I still don't even know what bulimia and anorexia are. I don't. I didn't want to know. We're still before the internet, though. I didn't want to know, but I probably could have found out. I had a feeling that this wasn't healthy. When you can't get out of bed to go to class, or you'd rather run than eat, and you're doing these things that are stressing your body, and you're constantly getting injured, and you're constantly feeling bad, you get an instinctive feeling that something's not right, even though you don't know what it is. But when your mind's trained to tell you it's survival, you disregard it. So I went to Pitt Law, and I graduated by the skin of my teeth. I mean, it was so close because I never went to class. I was always out running or drinking. I think when I went up for graduation, the dean of the law school kind of pulled back the diploma like it was a joke that I was even there. It's like, psych! But I did graduate, and I graduated as a terrible student by the skin of my teeth because I was engaging in every destructive behavior I could instead of studying, instead of trying to have a positive reason to be out there engaging with other people, not having any empathy for my own situation because I didn't understand my situation, not having the ability to say, I need treatment, because I didn't understand what that was either. So what am I going to do? I graduate from Pitt Law. And I know this is tough. Do we need to do some yoga or anything here? This is a tough slide down. But eventually we're going to get to the bottom and we're going to go back up. And it is a positive end because I'm standing here, right? So we'll get there. Got to take you on the roller coaster. So what am I going to do with my life? I'm going to repeat the cycle again because that's all I know. Binging and purging, drinking, running, that's all I know. That's all I want to do. That's how I survive. But this time I'll leave Pittsburgh and I'll leave these, in my mind, bad influence to fix myself and go live with my two brothers who had moved to Dallas, Texas in 1986. My brothers love me. I love my brothers. That would fix everything. They would fix me. I wouldn't need to fix myself. I wouldn't need to worry about that. My brothers would fix me because they love me, even though they don't know about these problems. We had never discussed these things. They were doing their thing in school and leading their own lives. So I moved to Dallas. I moved in with my older brother, Mark. And it was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Boof! Because they didn't know anything about my struggles. They're 27 years old. They're out drinking. They're out having a good time. They're going to bars. They're hitting on women. They're doing whatever. They don't know that I'm an alcoholic with an eating disorder. So I went out with them, and my alcoholism intensified. My eating disorder intensified because when you're drunk, it can become easier to engage in those behaviors. And so it was just a continued slide downhill until I discovered the next behavior that I would try to pull myself out of it, this instinctive way of choosing every self-destructive behavior out there to fix myself. I discovered drugs. I discovered cocaine in Dallas, Texas. And in a bathroom one day in a club in Dallas, Texas, I did that. And I was immediately a drug addict. Immediately, I became a cocaine addict. How does that happen? It does. For that 3 seconds, just like the bulimic act, for that 3 seconds, all of a sudden I was like, wow, that guy's cool. That guy's a Mac Daddy. That guy's finally going to go on a date. That guy's finally going to hold a girl's hand. He is the coolest dude in Dallas, Texas. For those few seconds of the high. Then the high goes away. And what happens? Just like with the bulimic act, the shame sets in. The shame of, one, I was doing something illegal, and two, it didn't fix me. Just another act that didn't fix me, because when the high wore off, there was that dumb bunny and fat pig staring at me in the mirror. Everyone I'd spoken to had spoken to, everyone I interacted with had talked to my mom in my mind. You know, I envisioned them, I projected out that they saw this fat pig and this dumb bunny. Finally, 3 failed marriages, numerous failed relationships, no treatment. I became so despondent that I would never see a normal Brian, whatever that was, in the mirror. I became suicidal in 2005. And in 2005, I made plans to end my life. And it was close. It was movie close. It was so close that I had the instrument of ending my life in my bedroom when my two brothers came in my room because a friend who was in my life, who was empathetic to what I was going through, who wanted to know more about what I was going through, called my younger brother and said, "You have a problem. Get over there. I'm on my way over." Jeff called Mark, who was in LA. Mark hopped on a plane and flew home. Next thing I knew, Jeff and Mark are in the house standing. I'm like, there are drugs everywhere. I have a weapon on my nightstand. I'm like, what are you doing here? We're here to help you. We love you. You're struggling. We're taking you down to Green Oak Psychiatric Facility. No, you're not. I'm a lawyer. You're not taking me down there. You know, I'm not crazy. Well, they took me kicking and screaming down to Green Oak Psychiatric Facility in Dallas, Texas. And we're on the way down there, and I'm in the car, and I'm starting to clear my head a little bit. And they had cleaned up all the drugs and took the weapon and everything out of the room. And I'm thinking, you know what? They're about to put a Britney Spears on me here. And they're about to try to commit me. And I'm not going to let that happen. So as a lawyer, I knew what to say. I'm not a danger to myself. I'm not a danger to my others. And in Texas, if they don't believe that, they can't do a thing. So they couldn't hold me. So my brothers drive me back home to my house. And we were still in a point in my family of enablement. Every family that has somebody with an eating disorder, addiction, alcohol, they all struggle with this gray area between love, enablement, and recovery. And for every family, that means something different. But we were still well into the enablement phase. So they knew I was an alcoholic. They didn't know anything about my eating disorder. They knew I was a drug addict. They take me back home. They say, stay in this house for 2 weeks and everything will be fine. I'm like, fine, my drug dealer delivers, no problem. So I stayed in the house for 2 weeks. Right back out on the scene. As far as Mark and Jeff were concerned, that 2 weeks was all I needed to cure myself. I was fixed. So everything was good. We never talked about it again. I made sure I didn't hang out with them, and I made sure I stayed within my group of addicts and other people, dysfunctional people, so I wouldn't arouse any suspicions of my behavior. And it just kept escalating and escalating. And I met another girl. And she knew nothing about these problems. I was very good at hiding my problems, an expert at hiding my eating disorder. I had a PhD in camouflage, and an expert at living a separate life, so the people who I didn't want to know didn't know about my alcohol and drug issues. Just totally separated myself and withdrew from family, and withdrew from the true friends who cared about me. We withdrew from the person who had called Mark, one of my best friends, who my book is dedicated to, for saving my life. This girl goes away. We've been dating for about a year. This girl goes away to visit her parents for a weekend. The next thing I know, it's over 2 days later. She's standing over me. I'm in bed. There are drugs everywhere. I'd clearly been unfaithful. She's looking down at me like, what's going on? I don't know what's going on. None of this is mine. None of this is mine. I don't know how this happened. Somebody came in my house and did this. Right. So we go back to Green Oak Psychiatric Facility. Second trip. She's crying, and I'm thinking she's gone. And she actually stood by me, and we've been together over 9 years. She actually stood by me through that and has been an instrumental part of my recovery. And so I'm standing in the parking lot of Green Oak Psychiatric Facility again, and I'm thinking to myself, you know what? I don't have a third trip back here. I'll be dead. And you know what scared me as much as that? You know what just terrified me? That area of love, enablement, and recovery was finally coming together. And I was in danger of losing my family. Because family may love you unconditionally, and we hope they do, but there may be limits on their willingness to watch you destroy your life if you're not going to take one little step. Just take one little step and try to move into recovery. It doesn't have to be a big step. And I knew that my brothers, especially, my father didn't know anything about this, and my mom and I would go through long periods without talking because of the cross-blame and anger over my childhood that was always unspoken. They had had enough. They have kids. They have families. I wouldn't want me around their kids and families either back then. And I just knew in my mind that we had reached that point where those things had come together. And I thought about my father. I thought about my father in that parking lot. My father was in his 80s. He was the middle of 3 children. Fought in World War II, fought in the Korean War, the greatest generation. Not really into all these things about eating disorders and things like that. You just didn't have these conversations, from the old generation. I remember what he told us growing up, Mark, Jeff, and I. At least once a week, in some manner, he would say, Brian, Mark, Jeff, he'd go, wives may come and go. And you hope they don't. For me, they have, but you hope they don't, right? Girlfriends may come and go. But when push comes to shove, all you have is each other. So wherever you go in life, wherever your journeys take you, always pick up that phone. Always tell the other one you love him. And this is my father, a strong man from World War II, telling his sons, tell the other you love him. So instinctive before his time. Say, you may not have tomorrow, so make sure every day you let the other one know you are there for them. And I thought about that in that parking lot. And I couldn't disappoint my father. And I couldn't lose that with my brothers. Lose what he had taught us. That was the aha moment you all been waiting for. I realized that it was time. That enough was enough. That I wanted to live. That I wanted to be free of this disordered eating that I really was coming to understand that was an eating disorder, but was too ashamed to tell anyone because I was a guy and really didn't understand that guys do get eating disorders. I knew women who had eating disorders because it's a much easier conversation. At that point, you have the internet, you see it. But I was too afraid to even go on the internet at that point because I knew there was a problem, but I was afraid I would find out I was the only one. And here, I'm an educated lawyer, and I wouldn't even go look because I was afraid that I would find out I was totally alone. That is the power of those thoughts to overpower everything. So the next day, now we're at April 8th, 2007. I walk into my shrink's office. I had one of the few treating psychiatrists in Dallas, Texas. A lot of times they just write scripts. I walk in there. I had been seeing him for 2 years because of clinical depression, just saying, give me medication, lying. Not telling about my eating disorder, not telling about the suicide near suicide, not telling him about the drugs. Why would you do that? You're paying this guy whatever amount of money. Why would you do that? Shame knows no hourly rate, right? If you're ashamed of where you are and you have not yet developed that relationship of trust and the ability to open up, you lie. Just like you lie to your friends, just like you lie to your parents, you lie to your roommate because you don't feel like there is anyone that's going to understand and the shame is so overpowering. So I lied to my shrink. I finally opened up because I didn't want to die. Told him about the drugs, told him about the alcohol. Didn't tell him about the eating disorder though, because I was still too ashamed to cut through that chase. Didn't tell him that I was bulimic. Didn't think he'd understand. Didn't think he'd know what it was. Didn't want to be judged by my own psychiatrist. So he goes, Brian, well, we have a lot of things to work on, but we have a problem. So what's that? He says, you're a freaking drug addict and alcoholic. We got to get you clean because we have to work on your childhood. We have to go back to all these things. So we talked about rehab. We talked about 12-step. And he goes, Brian, there's a 12-step meeting right next door. I'm not going to 12-step. I see homeless people and sterno bums. I'm a lawyer, not knowing that when I went in there, half the place was lawyers. And he goes, you're not a lawyer anymore, Brian. You ceased being a lawyer a long time ago. That is not your identity. You're a drug addict and you're an alcoholic. I was like, wow, maybe he's right. So I walked over to 12-step, April 8th, 2007, and since that day, and we'll talk about how I was able to achieve that, I'm happy to say I have not had a drink, I have not engaged in bulimia, I have not used drugs since April 8th, 2007, so I'll have 8 years this coming April, free of eating disorders. So how did I get there? It wasn't as easy as walking into a 12-step group. Well, there was one more thing I had to do. My father, who knew nothing about this, who my brothers and I shielded him from all of this because we loved him and I didn't want to disappoint him that I had not lived the life that he had wanted for me. I walked over to his place. Lived right down the street, still does in Dallas, Texas. If you want to know what my father instilled in us and how that took, my brothers, both my brothers and my father all live within a mile of each other in Dallas, Texas. That wasn't by plan. That was instinctive through what my father instilled in us to stay in each other's lives. So I go over to his house, knock on the door. Dad, I've got to talk to you. Come on in, Brian. I sit down on his couch. What's up? He's watching football. Well, Dad, I've had these problems. Told him everything but the eating disorder. I didn't think he'd understand what an eating disorder was. If I wasn't going to tell my shrink, I wasn't ready to tell my father. I mean, he's from the old generation. He wouldn't know what that was. In my mind, that's what I told myself so I didn't have to tell him. He goes, Brian, come move in with me. I love you. We'll get through this together. I was finally that 13-year-old little boy wanting to have the talk with his father all those years ago, decades ago, but was too afraid that his father would not love him. And my father loved me. And I moved in with my father, excuse me. And that was kind of like the weight of the world off my shoulders. But there's one more. There was one more thing out there that I hadn't dealt with. My mother. This relationship with my mother. And I'll tell you what, in therapy, peeling back that relationship was harder than stopping the behavior. Because how many people really want to go back, at least for me, it was a lot longer to go back than for you, to go back to those days of bullying and difficult relationships and open themselves up to that, feel vulnerable, make yourself totally vulnerable and trusting so that you can recover. That is hard to do for anyone. I understand that. And it was hard for me. But I was very lucky. Because here, I'm in my 40s. My mother and I had this difficult relationship. She took it upon herself to say, Brian, let me step into this and let's talk about this. Let's talk about what we never talked about, what has caused the anger and the blame for decades. I'll tell you about my life. And she did. And we talked about how she was raised. We talked about how she was verbally and physically abused by her mother, and how her mother had it done to her mother, and how her mother was bipolar, a genetic component. How my mother was a compulsive eater and food addict, a genetic component. And when I understood all these things, I was able to forgive. I was able to forgive my mother. Not even just from a scientific basis, because we know the parents don't cause eating disorders, from an environmental, just growing up basis. That 13-year-old little boy was finally able to forgive his mom and understand that it was not her fault. And once I was able to let go of that, I was able to let go of the anger towards these bullies, these kids who physically assaulted me, who I remember their faces like it was yesterday. I'm Facebook friends with some of these kids. And I hear, don't you want to confront them? Why? This isn't Maury Povich. You know, I would be confronting 51-year-old men, 54-year-old men, not 13-year-old boys. I want them to be living happy, productive lives, hopefully teaching their children differently than they were taught. That's what I want for them. And it's kind of funny. Recently, we talk about Facebook friendships. I got a friend request from my former drug dealer. And I'm like, dude, hand-to-hand exchanges on a college campus is not a friendship, okay? Unless you're coming to me in recovery, which I will accept anyone in recovery and work with them. and try to empower them. Unless you're coming to me in recovery, I got to draw the line here. I mean, I just have to. And he wasn't coming to me in recovery. He probably had a new shipment in, seeing if I was still in the business. So, block. And I started treating. And I started through methodical clinical treatment, cognitive behavioral therapy. I started to have to test my thoughts. I started to have to test those thoughts that everyone didn't think I was a fat pig and a dumb bunny just because they looked at me. That the girls weren't looking at me in a swimming pool where I couldn't take off my shirt with a gun to my head because I was so afraid of being judged at a swimming pool. Where I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror in the bathroom. I would go into the bathroom looking down at the floor for the entire time I was there because I just couldn't bring myself to look my head and face that fat pig and dumb bunny 13-year-old. I had to work on those thoughts in cognitive behavioral therapy. I had to work on those thoughts in what is called ACT therapy. And as the thoughts became less pervasive and my body image started to get better, the desire to binge and purge lessened. The desire to drink lessened. Well, I was white knuckling because I was trying to recover from these co-occurring disorders all at the same time, which is kind of unusual. The number of them that I went through and worked on all at once. Although people, usually when someone has an eating disorder, there's something else going on too. So there are co-occurring disorders is quite a common. I had 3 of them going on. And then we threw in steroid abuse as part of that as well. So as my self-image got better, as my relationship with my mother improved, as I felt the freedom of expression to love my body, no hair, heavy, thin, not worrying about what people thought of me in any situation, look in the mirror at that kid and say, hey, you're okay, Brian. That 13-year-old little boy is okay, and he will be okay. And as I did that, I realized that I might be able to use what I went through to help others. So I finally decided to write a book about it. And as many self-help memoirs start out, it was more of a healing process with me. Just like coming here to talk to you all and talking to other college students, I hope it benefits you, but it's a healing process for me as well. Every time I stand up here, I recover just a little bit more because, believe me, talking is healing. One of the most deadly symptoms of an eating disorder is silence. Talking is healing. Who do we talk to? How do we heal? I'm young. I don't know what I'm going through. My roommate's going through something. I see somebody that I don't really know going through something. It starts with empathy. You don't have to know what to do. A lot of us don't. Eating disorders are complicated things. Addiction is complicated. But the ability to empathize with the struggles of others is a tool we all have, and you don't have to read any book to have that tool. To tell your roommate, I see you're struggling. How can I help you? To see that friend, I'm here if you need me. You are loved. Because I will get people who say, I need help, but no one loves me. Who do you love? Let's talk about who you love. Let's talk about the people in your life that you show affection to, that you show empathy to. Can we reach out to any of those people? There is someone. And once we utilize the empathy that we all have, we can educate ourselves. Okay, I don't know what to do. What are the resources on the Claremont campuses? What are the peer recovery resources? Who else on campuses has gone through this that we can bring into it? Let's talk about peer recovery. Let's talk about counseling. These are your options. You can't make them do anything, but when you educate yourself through all the great materials that are out there that were not available when I was going through this, and that are widely available, and if you contact me, I'll give them to you. I'll give you those resources. Education breeds avenues. You can take this road, this road, this road, because I know these things now, and I can't make you take those roads, but I can show them to you. because somebody has to want to recover. We can't force people to recover. If you're a certain age, we can force you into recovery, but you have to want it. And once we are able to educate ourselves like that and use that empathy, then we are empowering. We're empowering ourselves. We're being empathetic to ourselves. We're empowering other people to at least think about it, to at least think about taking that first small step. And it doesn't have to be a big step. My steps forward have been small. Sometimes they were step backwards. But every time, I just pick myself up and keep moving, because it's okay to take a step backwards. Every day starts anew in recovery. Every day starts anew in our ability to love our bodies, love ourselves. And once we do all those things, we're ready for action. We are ready to maybe take another step, and another, and another. And what I will leave you with is just remember, everyone in this room will be touched in some way, whether it's by you, by your roommate, your parents maybe, just a casual friend, by eating disorders, by depression, by addiction, by alcohol abuse. You don't have to have all the answers, but you can be empathetic and let them know they are loved. Thank you. Do a Q&A.
Yeah, let me say some words of thank you really quick. Get one more round of applause for... If we have a few moments, we'd love to open up for some questions for people if they'd be able to do that. I'd like to thank people who made this possible today. If we could thank the Dean of Students office at Claremont McKenna, their help was a big part of this, as well as the whole athletic training facility and CMS Sports were able to help make this possible today and bring Brian here. So we can give them a round of applause. And then the last little plug is that there are resources on campus, whether that's counseling center, student health, or health education outreach. There are services on the campus for the students. So please, if you have questions for yourself or friends or roommates, please reach out and talk with them. We'll open up for questions.
So I'm an open book. I always do a Q&A. There is no question. If you want to ask me about Shark Tank, you can ask me. So there are no questions out of bounds. You can ask me whatever you like. About my recovery, about anything. Yes? I try not to judge anyone else's recovery, because the recovery looks different for everybody. But I can say for me, there have been moments of weakness, and I have been very fortunate to have put people in place to support me. My girlfriend's been very supportive. My family's been very supportive. I've developed a tremendous relationship of trust with my treatment provider. I went through seven treatment providers before I found one that I had this relationship with. There's no shame in that either. What I don't like to see is people thinking because one may not be a fit that they failed in some way. Finding the right treatment provider is a marriage. It really is like a marriage where you have to be able to expose yourself. So that's okay, and I did have to go through that journey. I am always aware of where I stand in terms of relapse. And a good example will be, for me, my weakest link in terms of my recovery is my relationship with exercise and food. Because the mind of an exercise bulimic needs to be retrained, and I'm still working on retraining that, because my mind was trained to convert everything into numbers when I ate. And so I understand that I have to stay very present in whether in my exercise routine, is it healthy? Can it go towards obsessive? And I'm always thinking about that when I exercise. And I don't view that as a bad thing. I'm in recovery every day. Every day I try to make myself a little bit better. I think everyone should be in therapy. I think it's a good thing. Talking is healing. Everyone has something they want to talk about. And if it's not in therapy, your roommate or whoever, somebody you trust. I think talking about our problems and our insecurities and how we feel about our body is a wonderful thing. Yeah, psychiatrists and psychologists. So I'm always present about my relationship with exercise and food, because I know if I am weak to a slip, it's right there. Yes?
It seems like in a lot of cases, for a breach to really occur, there's sort of a tipping point where the person wants it to occur and really, comes to terms with that and starts trying to change their attitude around it. So I was wondering if you have any ideas for people like people in this room that are trying to help people get to that point. Is there anything that we can do to help that point come?
That's a great question. What can you do to help? You can be empathetic. You can be understanding. You can and it's one thing to be empathetic and understanding in our mind. It's another to verbalize that you are empathetic and understanding. It's college students. I understand. We have our own stuff going on. It takes when you're deep in your own stuff, your own classes, your own life, your own struggles. It can seem like it takes a lot of energy to do that. Oh, what's the response going to be? But words don't cost anything. Hurtful words don't cost anything, and helpful words don't cost anything. That is the first start. And once we get past that, it's like I said, it's okay not to know what to do. There are articles, how to talk to your roommate about an eating disorder on the National Eating Disorder website. There are all these resources out there if you're concerned about what to say and not say. Because there are different schools of thought on what should be said. From my standpoint, I prefer the general empathy I prefer general empathy and caring. Other people talk about saying specific things about things they notice. And now if somebody's in a critical stage, then you have to make decisions about, should I go to student health? Should I say something? So it's going to depend on the specific situation. But it doesn't depend on anything to verbalize that you care. Yes? Thank you. Great question. My advice would be to realize that affirmations can be triggers and to talk to your treatment provider, talk to counseling, and because you have to realize that affirmations are about them trying to make, they don't know. Stay present in what it's doing to you, okay? Because affirmations, again, could be well-meaning, but they can be harmful as a trigger depending on the person. So when you hear the affirmation, stop and realize that they're coming from a place that isn't where you're coming from. And then talk to somebody. If you're in treatment, if you're seeing a counselor, if you have somebody you can talk to, say, I have these affirmations and they made me feel this way. They made me feel like I have to lose more weight. I have to do this. I have to do that. I want to talk about that because I know that that's not where I need to be. I need to be okay with where I am. Anyone else? Thank you. Can I have you come closer and repeat the question? Because I'm having trouble hearing you. Okay, that's a great question. We're talking about addiction? Okay, facilities are moving away from the single treatment model. There are many facilities out there that treat co-occurring disorders. And it's just a matter of research. You have to look at the qualifications. You have to see what they specialize in, but there are facilities out there that do treat co-occurring disorders. I mean, many of them. Okay, well, let me answer it another way. I had an eating disorder, I had drug addiction, I had alcoholism. 10 years ago, I would have had to go to rehab for 3 different things. Now we have many facilities that treat co-occurring disorders, that treat all of them together, which in my opinion is a much better model than finding, it's not necessarily true that you have to go to a different facility for each problem. Well, okay, well, do you want me to tell you what I'd tell you if he wasn't here? No. Okay, well, what I would tell you is that from your standpoint, okay, and I'll talk to you like, I'll be blunt, you can't make your father recover, okay? You can't allow that to become you because it's going to affect your life. It could affect whether you become depressed, whether you get, whether you go down different roads. You can educate yourself in the different treatment facilities available, the different treatment regimes, offer them to your father, say, here we go, and it's your father's decision. No one can make anyone recover. You have to want it. Yeah, but in the end, he has to want to move forward. You can't make that happen. You have to worry about being a happy young person, being productive in your life. But you can be supportive of the people we love. You can absolutely be supportive of the people you love, but all you can do is offer the resources. If he wants it and he's ready, he'll take it. Well, I wish you both the best. Yeah, I'll come back and autograph that. Yes.
I have a question. I think there's a lot of experienced professionals in the room, and talking about things we're all very passionate about. And you talked a lot about how your experience in college, there just wasn't the right resources. So I think what we would all like to know is kind of what more can we do to reach people who maybe experience.
Well, I mean, each school was limited by their own factors, budget, manpower. But one thing you do have is the ability to offer resources that are already out there, to know what's available, to be able to say, go to this resource, go to that resource, to have articles printed. My roommate's struggling. Here's an article from the NEDA website, how to talk to your roommate about eating disorders. These are when you have limited facilities, limited budget, I don't know what it is here, but when we have constraints, I mean, we can rely on what's already out there while we try to expand from within and to make it a more expansive program without having to reinvent the wheel. So my advice would be to have these resources ready, because when kids leave, they're not, they're like, yeah, whatever, okay, I'll do that. Here it is, how to talk to your roommate about an eating disorder. Do I have an eating disorder? I spoke at Penn State recently, and obviously they have a huge budget and have a huge counseling service. They have a detailed questionnaire that every student fills out, no matter whether it's a hangnail, a bruise, whatever they are coming in for. That questionnaire contains body image and shame related questions. So they can identify people who may have issues and be able to address it right there. Because people with an eating disorder often, and more often than not, come in for something else. And it has to be elicited from them. And if you don't have the information, how can you elicit it? So every student questionnaire has those questions no matter what they came in for. Does that answer your question? Mm-hmm. Anything else? Well, thank you. I really appreciate it.